Hey everyone, and welcome back to Coffin Talk, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week our guest is Cesar Cardona. He's a public speaker taught by Sri Lankan and Tibetan Buddhist monks. He was shaped by the profound readings and surviving death-like trauma 3 times since childhood. And he offers a unique perspective on resilience and mindfulness, inspiring audiences to embrace growth and strength through life's challenges. And we just had a little pre-chat, and he's a natural, and I really like his vibe. So sit back and relax and enjoy a good coffin talk. Cesar, welcome to the show. And if you don't mind, can you just tell us how old you are, where you grew up, and what generation, if any, you consider yourself a member of?
Right on. Thanks for having me. I appreciate that. Thanks for the great introduction as well. I'm 35. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and I am a millennial, proud millennial at that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. The millennial answer and then the pride, it changes, I've noticed. The question's just like a feeler and it kind of relaxes people. But, I also just felt at the time I started the show that someone in the powers that be were trying to divide us by generation. Like that was their new attempt. Yeah.
I have a friend with every conversation. He'll try to find some way to lean in the differences between the generations. He'll try in some capacity. And I'm just like, okay, great. I'm glad that works for you. I'm good.
Yeah. And speaking of differences, the identity formation is really interesting to me. Do you identify first and foremost as your gender or your race or your religion, your family history? There's a million things for it, but what do you find in your life to be the most divisive categories? So either for you personally or just from witnessing how and why people argue.
The most divisive category?
Yeah.
I think is the most divisive.
Just in your life experience. So it's not a definitive answer for the rest of us, but
yeah. You mean from my perspective?
Correct.
What works for me has been most divisive. Yeah.
In 35 years of living on Earth, you're like, whoa, man, this subject, in my opinion, has been the most divisive.
It's there's two answers to that question, because the biggest one ever for me was before I became a Buddhist, before I was a spiritual person. I was a strict science-based atheist in the South, and I'm in the South. I'm a complete atheist, and I'm Black and Spanish, so no one had any clue what to do with me and where to put me in their psychological placement of order or whatnot. I am not that anymore. I'm still Black, still Spanish, but just not an atheist, and but now I think mostly for me, the thing that I'll say if I speak about anything in particular, sometimes a lot of my viewpoints can be a bit postmodern, and people get a little confused by that stuff. They don't know what to do with that because it challenges what they've built for themselves in this society, which is also understandable too. But I'm more of a zoom out and then kind of zoom in kind of person.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense to me. And my mom's from Florida, so I actually lived in Tampa for 2 years when I was a kid. I don't remember it well, but I've been back and forth a lot, and it was always interesting because Florida's the stereotype from I grew up in California is so negative, but it's actually diverse. As weird as it sounds, there's a huge Cuban population in both Miami and Tampa. I have not spent a lot of time in Jacksonville. It's kind of on the 95, I go past it and I look over and then just keep going down to my relatives. But
it's ironic that they're not from the surface, they seem very opposite of each other, but the specifics of how it's built is similar. The little cities in between the major cities are really red. And then in the major cities, there's peppered throughout red cities. I know you're apolitical, but I think
but you're 1,000% accurate.
Yeah. So there's that, and then the upper half of Florida is sometimes it's considered South Georgia.
Yeah.
So you're gonna get a lot of Southern good old boy. Why are you on my block? Boy, you lost. You need help. What's going on? You should get out of here before dark, and so on and so forth. I will say Jacksonville in the last 10 years, I've been in Los Angeles for 10 years, but in that last 10 years, the city has become a blue city, which is cool. Wow. In my opinion.
Cool. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a mix of a lot of things going on at once. I would say that whatever someone reads about Florida, whatever they read, it's true.
I was expecting 500 different things for you to say there, and that was never going to be on my radar. That was awesome. That's cool. So I want to find out exactly what was the moment of transition or the moments between going from atheism to Buddhism. But before I do that, just because I have recently been interviewing Buddhists and like getting to know Buddhism better. Can you explain why you would say you're a Tibetan Buddhist as opposed to just saying Buddhist? Like, what is that
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic question. So, Buddhism as a whole, still, for the most part, still has a good streamline through it. You know, any particular lineage, for the most part, will talk to another lineage and have a conversation. They kind of understand the similarities. We don't proselytize. We're not trying to make somebody a Buddhist. It's kind of against the practice of Buddhism, honestly, because it's about letting go of your wants in the world, you know? Um, the reason why I say I'm a Tibetan Buddhist is because of the Buddhism would be like the metaphor of a tree. So you have the older versions, like the roots of the tree, right? And then you have the more recent Buddhism, like the leaves, the branches, where they're kind of they've grown out of the roots and became something else from a different perspective. The roots are the fundamentals, the older Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is like the trunk.
Mm.
We will often have conversations about the roots and have a conversation about the leaves, and then we have a conversation about what it sounds like when the leaves blow through the wind. You know what I mean? We'll get a little more philosophical in that way. And I also studied all of the lineages, the major lineages of Buddhism, and I leaned into Tibetan Buddhism more so because the one of the main tenets, one of the main things about it, and is compassion.
Mm.
One of the main things about it is leaning into compassion. All Buddhist practices have all the same tenets, have all the same outlook, the same perspectives, and then each one of them kind of highlight one a little more than the other. And Tibetan Buddhism focuses a little more on compassion. And a person like me, just the life I grew up in, for some reason, I just wasn't given a whole scoop of compassion. So I realized, let me go there. That's the one I need. I need to learn more of that and understand how to practice that and make that more a part of my life. So that's my long-winded answer to why I chose
No,
Buddhism.
that was not long-winded. That was actually great, and it really set me up to like kind of feel out like what questions I want to ask more of along these lines, because I do want to eventually get to like not only what you think happens when you die, but like I said, what the transition was and the three things you referred to in the bio that I read. But before I do that, I am. You said that I'm apolitical, which is very nice of you to say that. I try to make this show apolitical. Obviously, I've got
Oh, I see.
strong
Okay. I heard you
opinions.
say it on a previous show. So
No, exactly, and I'm sure you're quoting me directly and correctly. I am just like now realizing, oh, I kind of stepped into a mess with that, because what I am trying to be is apolitical, and one of the paths to it for me is trying to have compassion for the politics I don't like, the people who seem like Kool-Aid and then some about those, passion projects. So I kind of want to flip that question to you as someone who is like political, or at least to some degree. How does that mix with the compassion, and how have you been dealing with just like, not just like the last election, but just the last 8, 12, 16 years here in America?
literally,
Yeah.
that's a fantastic question. First thing first.
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
To understand something doesn't mean that you agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big part, right? And then if you want to learn the most about life to find the best possible working answer, because everything changes, you should be trying to understand as many things as possible. I'm not interested in what someone knows. I'm interested in what somebody understands. I'm not interested in necessarily what I know, because again, things change in the world. I'm more interested in what I understand. And if you want to bridge the gap from where you are to where someone else is, one of the best things you're going to have to do is understand. If you're trying to persuade them to think the way you think, or at least just to see your side, you got to understand where they're coming from to get the best possible way. Because we've already seen, and we're seeing today, in this day in life, yelling at somebody is not going to be convincing. Demeaning somebody, putting them down is not going to be convincing. I'm really political, actually. I'm happy to say that my perspective is very, very left leaning. And then I go out in the world and I'm moderate, because I recognize the world that we live in, we have to share space. In order to do that, I need to understand the person. I don't have to agree. I have to understand the person. And Buddhism is lined up for exactly that. The goal is to release you from more and more tribalism as you can. At some point in the Buddhist text, it says you got to let go of Buddhism. You know,
Mhm.
you
That's
kindle the
cool.
fire with a stick, and then at some point you have to take that stick and throw that in the fire too. You know, you have to let go of those things. And I've taken that same perspective and just applied it to as many things in life as I can, because it keeps me freed up to change with the change of time. And life always changes, doesn't it?
That's cool, and that's actually is very unexpected for me. I thought it was going to be much later in the show, but now I do want to ask you, what do you think happens when you die? And I want to know, does that change, like, or alter from the actual stated Tibetan Buddhist opinion of what happens when a human dies?
Man, you're killing it with these questions. These are great questions.
It's my goal.
Yeah. I'll answer from the last question because it does
Yeah.
make sense. Mine does differ a little bit from just what the context of Tibetan Buddhism or any Buddhist is going to say. In the doctrines, for example, for lack of a better term, it's very, very leveled with where Buddhism can be, because we have 8,600 doctrines of what the Buddha said, because he was enlightened at 35, he died when he was 80, and can I cuss on this show?
I have to believe it, so
Okay,
I don't care if you cuss, like, as a personal.
I won't cuss then, don't even worry.
Apple makes me believe it.
Well, let's just say there's a homeboy lived for a long time, so he had a lot of words to say, right? And so we have so many doctrines, and also in that, multiple times he said, I am just a teacher. You have to go walk your path. You have to go do the thing that works for you. So don't take it, and this is quoting the Kalama Sutra directly, don't take it because I said it, or authority says it, or because the time says it, or routine says it, or the culture says it, or religion says it. Take it, find what brings you peace, inward and outward, and apply. What doesn't, discard. So that frees me up to be separate from whatever text I'm reading, because one of the main things of Buddhism is that in life there's impermanence. We change. So that law, Buddhism is subject to that as well, right? So
deep.
it's easy for me to make that separation. So that being said, what I think happens when you die, I am a non-dualist, which also is not particularly a Buddhist thing, actually.
Yeah, that surprised me.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Upanishads, and that one really got me. It's a Hindu text.
Wow. Yeah.
People who don't know what that is. So I am a consciousness starts. There's a unity. There's a complete non-two-ness of consciousness in this entire universe and beyond the stuff that we can comprehend. And it's formless, smellless, tasteless. The only way we tap into it that we have so far is by way of meditation, and also just by way of right here, right now, being aware of your thoughts. Not the thoughts you have, not the feelings, not the beliefs, not the dogmas, not the traumas, none of that. Those things are very important, obviously, but the awareness of it is what you really are, and that's the consciousness out of which everything comes. So knowing that, and for me personally, resonating with that consciousness, that awareness, it's like I am currently in this life, I am a scoop of honey. And then at some point, the honey gets unraveled and falls back into the pot of honey, and you can't tell the difference. And I mean that from a sense of my awareness, who I am as a person, the body awareness that comes with me, the untouchable, any of that. And when this body changes, which it does constantly, because you, me, anybody listening, who they're not who they were when they were 5, 15, 25, 35, and so on and so forth. It's ever changing. The only constant has been your awareness in it. And that consciousness is what all the physical matter comes out of. So when I die, and this is where my belief comes in. I'm not going to use the right words here, but this is where my belief comes in, where I feel like this is what it feels like, but I don't have to tie myself to it. I don't feel like it's influencing my day-to-day life, because doing something for the sake of karma is improper. I'm doing it I'm being kind for the sake of being kind. I'm being peaceful for the sake of being peaceful. So anything after that is almost secondary, what happens after this. But what I do think happens is that consciousness is here, that's in this vehicle of this body. And when this ends, because of the time I've lived with it, there are imprints or folds that kind of go with it. The same way you would wash out how do you say this? Like you have a whole jar of water, and you put a bunch of salt in it. And then little by little, you start pouring it out and mixing it with other clear water. Each one of those waters takes a little bit of the salt with it. And if you keep washing it little by little, it'll kind of wash itself out. And that's jar to jar, life to life, to life, to life, to life. So that's why I feel like there's a rebirth. There's some sort of, there's a continuum, obviously, because we're all just the consciousness, this vessel and body dissipates and turns into something else. But you take something else with you as well. And that's why I think we have people kids, for example, mainly children, who have a premonition, or they say stuff of like, oh, I lived there in my last life, and they go check it out, and then they find out that it's accurate. What's the with the University of Virginia in the 70s, they did those studies on
cool.
all of the kids, like over 2,500 children who had talked about past life, and they went and checked it out, and so many times it was verified. And these are times that are recorded. Let's not talk about, the centuries of times where people have said stuff like this and it just gets pushed away because people didn't want to believe it, or they didn't have the means to search it or whatnot. And again, a little long-winded answer here, but my belief is there's this rebirth that keeps copying itself or keeps turning over. You get a scoop of honey, it exists for somewhere between 60 to 70, 80, 90 years. If you're lucky, it gets poured back into it. There's some of it from the previous scoop that goes with the next scoop, and maybe not, and so on and so forth. And your actions determine what goes with and what doesn't go with.
So it was very cool. This is like my dream conversation. This is like with or without pot or anything else. I just want to have these conversations ever since I was a child. So
same.
Because I want, like, you're helping me see a flaw in my logic that isn't in yours. So I want to know, because you switched or inserted something into the metaphor. So you started with honey, and I got all that. Mm-hmm. And then you talked about the mason jar, let's say, or just the jar. Okay.
Sure.
So my question is, did the honey make the jar?
That's the end of the question. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's the first part.
First answer is, I don't know. I have no clue. But I will say
well, my question more is in
consciousness. Yeah. That of material is what you're asking. Oh, gotcha. In a more direct, I thought you were going with the metaphor.
No, yeah.
In my opinion, yes. From my perspective of life, how I've observed the nature of life, and then when I sit with my own self and sit quietly in meditation and remove all the wants and the desires and all the stuff that has been given to me from my DNA and my childhood and when I get to a place of stillness, the thing that I find is always there, out of which everything comes, is the consciousness. We have a society where it's material came first and out of that came consciousness. I don't necessarily, I don't subscribe to that actually. I think it's the other way. I think it's the underside. I think the consciousness is the thing, the awareness that shows up and then started materializing.
I firmly agree with you. And if that's a political opinion, Coffin Talk just became political, because I definitely, that is the thing that probably bothers me the most about the world I entered and live in and compete against and with, is that, like, I'm okay with materials. I love them. Obviously, I love this laptop I'm using to connect to you. Fun. I like, but what I don't understand is this idea that at the end of the day, at the end of the life, the pursuit of materials and the accumulation of materials was significant or would even matter. And then also, though, I gel with like this idea that when a kid says I was one of the more famous ones I remember was like he pinpointed where his Japanese plane crashed in the Atlantic Ocean in World War II. Right. And that one like really stuck just because it was like military people were confirming it. And I always like when the military confirms like esoteric stuff, because I feel like it gives Americans like a little bit more grounding. I'm like, okay, I have to reluctantly admit. Yeah. And so when that kid said that, though, what I don't think is that that kid was that soldier. And that's where I think we're really agreeing on. And that's why I really liked your honey and the jar idea, is that no, like that kid is part maybe a life that I had, and maybe I'm a part of the life he had. And maybe I even have a part of that Japanese soldier's life in me. And that's what you said that like really got me going, because that would make sense with every major religion's philosophy that I like, you know, including, and I'm glad you brought up the, I'm not going to say them right, Upanishads from Hinduism, because when I started having more compassion for animals, especially, I was like drawn towards Jainism. But then the part of Jainism that bothered me was that it's Hinduism, and then there's a lot of Hinduism that I don't gel with, and then Buddhism I like, but there's parts of Buddhism I don't like. And so it's actually funny because that's the hybrid I want, is like this cross between those two. And so like I loved your answer, and I loved your follow-up answer to my question, and I think now would be a good time to like go back in time to what changed, what made an atheist and a strong, assertive atheist start to question atheism, and then eventually become the kind of guy who's on a podcast, not preaching, but in a positive way, talking about compassion and admitting that you don't have complete compassion.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, a few things to unpack some of the stuff before I can answer your question. One,
Sure.
In no way am I trying to convince anybody to believe something.
No, yeah.
What I want someone to do, however, is find the thing in their life that brings them the most peace, and they go out into the world and help do that. It could be Christianity, it could be atheism, it could be humanism, it could be. I'm disinterested in trying to make you see my way. All I want you to do is find the beautiful as your way. So that being said. The boy who had the premonition about being the Japanese pilot, he wasn't that man, and that man wasn't him. They both were source. They both were that. You know what I mean? Like, so it just dressed itself in that for the time. And then for me to come back to being a little more personal, a multitude of things. One, the lack of. I'm going to preface by saying this is a me thing entirely. Atheism for me brought out the worst in me as a person. I'm not saying atheism brings out worse in other people. This is just me to me. It brought out the absolute worst in me as a person because my childhood was terrible, horrible. I was just surrounded by violence and a lot of isolation and abandonment. So for me to take on a belief, or in this case, a lack of belief, that also instills that isolation, it brought out the most traumatized version of me as a person, without having tools how to deal with it. I mean, I was 18 when I said verbally out loud, that's it, I'm an atheist, there's no God here, and so on and so forth. And it just led me down a path that was really unhealthy. And from there, I started slowly, maybe not so slowly actually, but I started going towards the direction of this destructive path. Absurdism?
Yeah, definitely.
You know, the concept, and then, you get the three responses to the isolation of the nothingness and so on and so forth. And the one of them is the slow decaying of the self by not treating yourself well. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. That's where I started going. So there's drugs and substance, alcohol, and very unsafe promiscuity, just doing all sorts of wild, unnecessary stuff that literally screamed out, I'm ready to go. I don't want to be here, right? I don't know how it happened, but maybe I got my wish, and I got into a really bad accident after about a decade of this unhealthy living. I got into a really bad accident where my face was all messed up. My eye socket was smashed in. My nose, the front of my teeth were gone. These are all fake teeth in the front. My stomach, my bladder was ripped wide open. I had to get cut open. I had to learn how to walk again, talk again, all of this stuff, right? There's your symbolic rebirth, right? And to learn how to walk and talk again, someone had to feed me like a baby. So I'm doing that rebirth sort of thing. And then at some point at that lowest stage, which this is most people's story, why they get spiritual, right? Something happens to them dramatically. I live in LA, and there was a place in the Valley in North Hollywood, a big picture of Jimi Hendrix, and I'm a big Jimi Hendrix fan since I'm 13, 14.
Cool.
And I walked up to the big mural. It's in North Hollywood. It's on Lankershim. If anyone ever wants to Google it, Jimi Hendrix mural, Lankershim, NoHo Arts District, and it's a big yellow and black painting of him with his hands on his hips, and he's just staring straight ahead. And I came to Los Angeles because I was playing music, and I wanted to find something in my life. I didn't like Jacksonville, Florida. And this atheist, this very, very strict science-based material reductionist atheist, walks up to this building and starts talking to it, So, the hubris of the psyche, of the ego, to say that I have everything I need. It's adorable. And I'm not saying I don't have it anymore. I still do it all the time. I just know that ego is not the driver of this vehicle anymore. I started talking to it and saying, "Hey, Jimmy, you got me here. If you can't help me with this, I'm not going to see the end of 2019." And this was at the time was December 2018, because I was just a slave to all my impulses and all my negative thinking about my life and so on and so forth. And it happened to be right across the street from a Buddhist center, like a block over or something like that. And I saw that while walking, and I realized, I'm just going to take a walk in there and see what's up and see what happens. Ironically, as an atheist, I did often always say, if I had to pick a religion, I'd pick Buddhism. And I meet a bunch of secularist atheists now who say the same thing. And then so I walked in there because it kind of felt like a cool gray area, because you can still be an atheist and a Buddhist. You don't have to believe in a deity or whatnot. It's not required, at least. I just so happened to keep moving and releasing and meditating and releasing all these things in my life and finding out why I chose all the stuff that I chose, and realizing that I was a slave to the trauma of who I am as a person, rather than resonating again with consciousness. And once I could kind of get just the smallest sliver, just a little bit of space between my thoughts and myself, capital S self, is when I started investigating every single choice I was making. And bit by bit by bit by bit, I started reading more Buddhist doctrines, and I found Joseph Campbell. And then that cracked me open. Joseph Campbell just cracked me wide open, because I thought to myself, oh, wait a minute. I was an atheist because people are saying true or false on these stories from a previous time. And I'm forgetting the third option. It's a metaphor to the human experience, the mystery of this thing. And in that moment, that lit me up. And my whole life changed. I was like, okay, let's work on everything I can do. And I got sober, and I started being monogamous in relationships, and all the crap I had done before, I made amends to. I'm not a part of the program at all. I'm just sober by just day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. But I understood the concept of making amends because of this. It's living within me. And then I put out, I made someone else dissatisfied and suffer in their life. Let me try to write that. And then, of course, you, as still a person who understood the scientific method, you reflect and you test, what did we learn here? And I look back and I realize, oh, I feel lighter in my life. Oh, I am getting much more of the things I've always wanted in my life now. Oh, I am kind to myself for once. Then everything started changing in the world. And now it is one of the best choices I've ever made in my life. Aside from moving to Los Angeles, the second best choice was picking up a Buddhist text and reading some of it.
That's incredible. That was a great story, and well told and fascinating, and I was riveted the whole time, and I was so into it that I really didn't have building or burgeoning questions, but I think it does leave me with a personal question to ask you. And it's interesting because to me, age both does and doesn't matter, but I always find it fascinating when I'm interviewing someone younger than me and I see parallels in their youth and my youth. And so I won't get into the details of my life, but I had a bad car accident, but I didn't really wake up and do much to change after that. And then I had a pretty bad experience 6 years later, and I sort of woke up, and then I had the shitstorm that was inevitably coming, and I made several decisions that echo yours, but I still have a lot of trouble with something, and you said something that contradicts my experience with what's happened in my life, which is, you said, I made the switch and then more good things seem to be happening to me. And I don't notice any correlation between my switch and more or less good things happening. But what I do notice is that I find it harder and harder to root for myself and my goals without feeling guilty. And yet I feel really guilty and a sense of you're doing this is wrong. This is wrong. Whenever I try to give up my own ideals and goals in life, my childhood dreams, especially.
Can I say that back to you to make sure I understand what you're saying?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. You're saying that when you, these changes you make in your life, one, they're not making you feel, you're not seeing.
I feel better.
Okay. Okay.
for sure.
Uh-huh.
But I have like childhood goals that are tied to materialism but aren't necessarily
Oh, I
materialistic.
see.
And I find it harder and harder to root for myself in those. And yet, when I say, okay, then I'll just quit all aspirations like those,
Mm.
this like real strong voice, like almost like a Jimi Hendrix moment, says like that would be a really bad mistake. Like
Mm.
you came here to Joseph Campbell, you came here to dream and pursue.
Mhm.
So I'm asking you kind of for like advice just on like, does that happen to you? Has that happened? And yeah, just I mean, if that gels with anything or sparks something in you. I just felt like that was a good question to ask you.
That's a fantastic question. I preface by saying always, I'm not telling you what to do.
No,
Why
yeah,
am I
that's
telling you
part of why I asked you.
Great.
If I felt like you were going to tell me what to do, I don't think I would have asked you a single question.
Good. Yeah, everybody's path is their path, man. There's no, in my opinion, you either win or you learn. There's, and that's just the journey of your life. That's the way it goes. What I did hear from you though is that it seemed like if you didn't give yourself to some of those childhood things, that you just give it all up, and those are dichotomies. You are by default, and I'm just saying this, you are by default missing out on all the other varieties of what it could be. There's a bunch of iterations you can do that doesn't have to be black or white. It's. I had a therapist once, and she asked me what I wanted from my childhood. We did a bunch of work together, and I looked at her and I said, I just wish that I could have played with my action figures more often. And I was 31 at the time. So I went down to Blast from the Past on Magnolia Boulevard in Burbank, and I found 3 action figures that I had when I was a kid. And you know what I did at 31 years old? I played with them. I sat and played with those action figures. I have them right there at this window. I could grab them and show you all 3 of them. I keep them with me, and I play with them for like a month. Imagine a 31-year-old man playing with action figures. And it felt more therapeutic than a year of therapy.
Wow.
Now, therapy got me there. So does that mean that I need to go and like make a whole room of action figure? No, it doesn't have to. It could be, but you don't have to. But I found an iteration that appeased that part of me as a person, right? And if that version of you is calling out to you so much, you it would be beautiful of you to turn to it and say, what can I actually give you that will satisfy some of this? It doesn't have to be all of it, obviously. Again, that version of you is not driving the car, but it can be in the back seat, and it could say, I want to hear this song, and you put that song on every 4 songs, and the other 4 are the ones you want to hear. I'm basically saying is that, and society does this a ton, obviously, we always find the 2 ends of the opposites, and we think that it's like one of this or that. And I feel like at some point a light turns on and you realize it's just 2 ends of a circle, and it's just a radius. And so it's your job to say, what iteration can I meet it at? Can I meet it right now? I don't know what the thing you're asking for, but meet it where it is, and then find out where it can work for you in your waking life.
No, that worked. What you said, not only did it make sense, but like intuitively, I already got like what my version of buying 3 action figures would be for that.
Great.
So
cool. Then I'll shut up. Yeah, go.
So no. That was great. And the moment it sunk in was actually your analogy about the car, because I have 3 kids, and the middle one, the daughter, sits in the back seat and every day just demands that we listen to "Let It Go" from the Frozen movie.
Sure. Yeah,
and
great song.
the ratio I can handle is about 1 out of every 4. That's like literally like the compromise I made to not be like a horrible dad who just forces his daughter to never hear her song, but also doesn't have to listen to "Let It Go" on repeat every
Exactly. That's literally it. I mean, it's the middle path, going back to a science standpoint, we have abiogenesis, the study of life deriving from non-life. Do you know this study, this chemical study?
Right? Yeah.
It's for listeners who don't know it, and I'll keep it brief.
Please.
The studies in the 50s were the Miller-Urey experiment. Miller-Urey, U-R-E-Y experiment. And it shows a template of an early Earth and they made like a lab of early Earth environments, quote unquote, and they had this sterile water in it, and then they did a practice of what early Earth would be like. And after about 5 days, that water was full of proteins and amino acids and so on and so forth. And it's just a chance of what early Earth could be before we had life form on here. And we all know that Earth is in the habitable zone, the Goldilocks zone. We're not too close to where water boils up instantly. We're not too far to where it freezes instantly. We are just right in a good pocket for life to survive and thrive. And if we are byproducts of that nature, why shouldn't we be finding a middle ground instead of leaning from one far end to the other far end? We can find this middle path because we are product of that not too hot, not too cold metaphor of nature. And that's the same. I'm extending that idea to you, and I spend my life trying to do it also. The sooner we get away from the too far one way, too far the other way, the more happy we're going to be.
That's really cool. And we started with kind of politics, and I think that's a good way to end, because I feel like that's a lot of the complaints in America is like, where are we on this pendulum? And that's the actual advice is like, you know what? You're right. There is a pendulum, but there is a sweet spot, and it would be as simple as all of us meeting there, and then we're there. So thank you so much. I do give my guests like the opportunity to just have the floor at the end of the interview. So is there anything you'd like to add just to speak out to my audience?
Yeah, totally. There's only one thing I say in the end of everything is to any person listening, please be kind to yourself. It's magic, I promise.
That's awesome. That's truly great. Cesar, thank you so much for coming on the show. There will be notes for how to find Cesar if you're interested. And if you are listening and something he said compelled you to action, please let me know. Let me know if any of this is like working out, because the feedback I do get is positive, and I get some, but I actually want to know if I'm helping people, because the purpose of this podcast is not just to like be on the air and like talk to people and meet people, because selfishly that is incredible and so much fun. But I am actually trying to help motivate people to do exactly what Cesar spent most of this interview talking about, which is to find your journey of self-discovery. Don't let anyone tell you what it is or how to do it, but be on that journey. Like, don't stagnate, and especially don't withdraw into drugs, alcohol, or whatever your thing is, food. It doesn't matter. There's a million different things different humans pick as their proclivity to hide and shirk away from the great splendor of life. But I think Cesar did a great job, and I feel more motivated. So that's why I ended the podcast this way. Is I just wanted to thank you, Cesar. That was very cool. So Cesar is my new friend. Before the podcast, he was giving me shaving tips, and so he helped me find direction in life, and he's going to help me find a better razor so I don't cut my face. And on that note, my name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been watching or listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.